The ER has a rhythm you get used to after a while. The buzz of the overhead lights, the distant beeps from machines, the constant shuffle of feet. It's chaos, but it's a manageable chaos. Or so I thought. I've been a nurse long enough to see everything: fatal accidents, broken bodies, twisted limbs, but there are things I've seen, things I can't explain, that still make my blood run cold when I think about them. One Friday night a few years ago, we had a night that started out like any other. The ER was busy as usual. The usual mix of alcohol-induced injuries, car accidents, and fevers. I had just finished stabilizing a kid with a nasty head injury. When the call came in, motorcycle crash, male, mid-30s, high speed, no helmet, the voice over the radio said. I sighed. Another one. The paramedics rushed him in, a man named Jason Carter. He was in bad shape. Road rash covering his left side, blood soaking through his clothes, and most concerning of all, a massive head wound. He was unconscious, but his body was twitching, his heart still beating, barely. We hooked him up to monitors, pushed fluids, and worked fast. But it didn't take long for the doctor to confirm what we already knew: massive trauma. His brain was swelling, and there was nothing we could do. I stayed by his side as the team worked. We tried everything: intubating him, administering fluids, even shocking his heart back into rhythm. But some things just can't be fixed, no matter how fast you work. His heart stopped at 11:27 p.m. I didn't want to be the one to do it, but I was the one who zipped the body bag. It's never easy. No matter how many times you do it, the body's always cold, and there's that vacant, slack expression, like they're still waiting for someone to come back. But Jason was gone. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. The weight of it never gets any easier, and sometimes, you just need a moment to collect yourself. I stepped out to grab the paperwork, told Jessie, the new nurse, to cover the room while I was gone. It's what I always do. Make sure someone's with the body until it's transported. I remember the sound of the door closing behind me. It was that sudden, then it started. The screaming. Not a groan, not a moan, not even a gasp. It was a deep, guttural scream, the kind of sound you don't expect to hear coming from a body that's already dead. Jessie was standing outside the room, staring at the door like she had seen a ghost. I walked toward her. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her face pale. "I did," I said, even though I didn't want to admit it. I opened the door slowly, the hinges squeaking. The lights were on, the machines were still, no alarms, no signs of movement. Jason's body was still lying there, motionless, mouth agape, just as it had been when I left. But the scream, it was still lingering, hanging in the air. I froze in the doorway. The room felt different, charged. There was no mistaking it. Jason's mouth had been open when I left, but now it was as if his lips had moved after death. His jaw was slack, like it had let out that scream, but his body remained cold, unresponsive. We checked everything: his vitals, the monitors, nothing. No pulse, no reflexes, no muscle activity. He was still dead, but it didn't matter. The room felt ... wrong. Jessie was crying, not sure what to say, and I could see her hands shaking. I stepped closer to the body, trying to shake off the feeling crawling up my spine. Maybe it was just a glitch, I said. A trick of the mind, but I didn't believe it. None of us did. The next day we looked at the footage from the hallway camera. No one had entered, no one had left. It didn't make sense, but I documented it anyway, the best I could. Auditory anomaly reported from Trauma Room 3, following confirmed time of death. No physical activity noted, no patient vitals. Incident witnessed by multiple staff. That was the best I could do. No mention of what we heard, just cold, clinical facts. But I could feel it, even then. Something in that room was different. Later that night, Jessie came to me in the break room. She didn't say much, just asked, "Do you think maybe he didn't know he was dead yet?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. We didn't talk about it after that. We didn't want to. But ever since that night, I've had trouble walking past Trauma Room 3. Every time I do, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still there, watching, waiting. And every time I hear a door creak open, or a whisper, my heart stops for just a second. I don't believe in ghosts. I've seen enough in the ER to know that death isn't something that can be explained away with superstition. But whatever happened that night, whatever was left in that room, it's still there. And sometimes, I wonder if we, the living, are the ones who are really gone. I've seen things that can't be explained, things that make you question what you really know about life and death. But some nights, when the lights flicker in the ER and the machines hum too loud, I swear I hear something, a sound that doesn't belong, a whisper, a scream, a voice calling out from beyond the veil. I just hope it's not Jason's. You wouldn't believe the things you hear in the ER after years of working nights. I've come to expect the weird and the horrible, but some nights are different. Some nights you see things or hear things that you can't explain, no matter how long you've been in this job. But there are a few stories that still haunt me, even after all this time. The kind of things that make you wonder if there's more to life than we understand. And maybe, just maybe, death isn't the end. It was a cold Thursday night in early December when it happened. The usual chaos was in full swing, patients rolling in with broken limbs, an overdose here and there, a few people who thought they were having heart attacks, but just had indigestion. Just another night, really. I was working the graveyard shift, of course, which is when things tend to get interesting. You're already running on fumes. Your mind starts to wander, and the ER has this eerie quality at night. The overhead lights flicker more often, and the beeping of the machines seems to echo in the quiet moments between chaos. Around 2 a.m., a paramedic team brought in a woman who was barely breathing. She was in her late 40s, unresponsive, a mix of old and new injuries. A motor vehicle accident, they said, but the real story was written on her body, cuts and bruises all over, but her chest was a mess, blood pooling, lungs collapsing. They said her name was Margaret. No family with her, no identification, except a crumpled card in her pocket with a number on it. We rushed into action in tapeting, pushing fluids, trying to stabilize her, but her pulse was weak. So weak, it was almost I've been a nurse long enough to know when the battle's lost, and I could feel it. The quiet, cold weight of inevitability settling in. By 2:47 a.m. her heart stopped, flatlined. No more beeping, no more breaths. I stood there, holding the chart in my hands, trying to keep my composure as the doctors declared her dead. The room was still, too still, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I'd seen it all before, deaths that hit hard, deaths that come with a lot of grief. But Margaret, she didn't feel like she was gone. It was like her presence lingered in the air, stubborn, unyielding. We moved her body to the morgue for transport, and I told one of the other nurses, Emily, to finish the paperwork. I went out to the hallway to catch a breath, trying to shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. That's when I heard it, the sound of someone crying. Soft at first, barely a whisper, but unmistakable. It came from trauma room 2, the room where we'd just worked on Margaret. I froze. It couldn't be. I'd just checked the body. No movement, no sign of life. Still, the cry continued. I walked back toward the room, slowly, almost as if I were drawn to it. I opened the door and stepped inside, holding my breath, unsure of what I was going to find. There she was, Margaret, still lying on the bed. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, mouth agape. Her body was still cold, stiff. There was no sign of life, but the crying, it was coming from her. Not from her mouth, not from her chest, but from deep within her body, as if the sound was trapped somewhere inside. It was like she was trying to speak, but the words didn't form. Just raw, guttural sobs, deep and pained. My heart was in my throat, and I stepped closer to the body, trying to steady myself. Emily followed me in, her face as pale as a ghost. We both stood there listening to the cries coming from a body that was supposed to be lifeless. Her chest wasn't moving, no breath, no heartbeat. The crying continued. We checked the monitors again. No sign of life, no pulse, no respiration. But those sobs, they were so real, so full of pain and fear, they sounded almost human. Did you hear that? Emily asked, her voice shaking. I don't know what it is, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was trying to stay calm, trying to hold it together, but everything in me screamed that something was terribly wrong. We backed out of the room and closed the door, but the sound of crying didn't stop. It felt like it was following us down the hallway, echoing off the walls. I had to leave the ER for a minute to collect myself. I stepped outside into the cold, trying to take a few breaths. The fresh air helped, but when I went back inside, I still felt like something was off. The rest of the night passed in a blur of minor injuries and routine cases, but I couldn't shake the feeling of Margaret's cry lingering in the back of my mind. It was like her presence never left. At the end of my shift, I went to the morgue to see if they had moved her yet. I wasn't sure why I felt compelled to check, but I had to. When I got to the morgue, I froze. The door was slightly ajar and I could see the body bag lying on the table, but it wasn't zipped up. I pushed the door open, my breath catching in my throat. The room was empty. Margaret was gone. I checked the logbook. The body had been signed off for transport earlier in the night, but as I looked around the room, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. One of the morgue drawers was open, just a little, and inside there was a small silver charm. It was the same charm that Margaret had been wearing around her neck when she came in, the one that said, "Breathe." I closed my eyes for a second, trying to steady myself, but when I opened them, the drawer was closed again. It's been a few years since that night, but I can still hear her cry sometimes. Late at night, when the ER is quiet and I'm walking down the hall alone, that faint, raw sob. It's like Margaret's voice is still calling out from somewhere, trapped between the living and the dead. Some nights I think about what happened, what it was that made her cry. I don't know if it was her soul, trapped in her broken body, or something else, something darker. But I've learned to listen to the silence, and I've learned to trust the things that can't be explained. Because in the ER, sometimes the dead don't stay dead. The thing about the ER is that it doesn't slow down. There's always someone coming in, someone needing help, someone trying to hang on just a little longer. You become numb to it after a while. The blood, the screams, the heart-wrenching pleas for life, it all becomes background noise. But there are some nights, some cases, that don't just blend into the chaos. They stick with you, no matter how hard you try to forget. I've been a nurse for almost 10 years now, and in that time, I've seen things that still make my skin crawl. But it wasn't until last year that I experienced something I can't explain. I can't forget it, and I'm not sure I ever will. It started on a quiet Tuesday night in February. The usual shift busy, but not too bad. A few car accidents, some chest pains, a couple of overdoses. I was working the triage desk, sorting through the paperwork, trying to keep up with the steady flow of patients. It was around midnight when they brought her in, a woman in her late 50s, looking like she'd just been through hell. Her name was Clara, and she had been found unconscious in her apartment. A possible stroke. Her blood pressure was through the roof. Her pupils were unresponsive, and she was practically unrecognizable. The paramedics had worked on her for a while before they got her here, and by the time she arrived, her vitals were crashing. We rushed her into trauma room 2, and I could already feel the tension in the air. It was one of those nights when everyone could tell this wasn't going to be an easy save. We worked on her for over an hour. The team did everything we could. We pushed meds, checked for clotting, ran tests, but there was nothing. Clara was gone. I watched the monitor flatline and felt that familiar weight of loss settle in. It's never easy, but after a while, you learn to steel yourself. You sign the paperwork, you give the family their time, and you move on to the next case. But Clara's death, it felt different. It didn't feel right. When I zipped up her body bag, I noticed something strange. Her hand was still warm, not the kind of warmth you expect from someone who's been dead for over an hour, but a soft, almost human-like heat. I checked her pulse again, just to be sure, but there was nothing. I didn't want to make a big deal of it, so I brushed it off. I thought maybe it was just the stress of the shift playing tricks on me, but the strange feeling stayed with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. As we moved her body to the morgue, something else happened. It was just me, the technician, and a couple of other staff members as we wheeled Clara's body down the hallway. The lights flickered above us, and the air in the hallway grew colder. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt like someone was watching us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind us, but there was no one there. When we reached the morgue, the technician opened one of the storage drawers, and we started to transfer Clara's body inside. But as we did, something strange happened. The drawer slammed shut on its own. At first I thought it was just an accident or malfunction, maybe, but when I tried to open it again, it wouldn't budge. It was as though the drawer had locked itself. I glanced at the others, and I could tell they felt it too. It wasn't just me. After a few minutes of struggling, we finally got the drawer open, and Clara's body was placed inside. But before I left, I turned back for just a second, and that's when I saw the faintest outline of Clara's face, her eyes still open, staring at me from within the body bag. I stepped back, my heart racing, but I told myself it was just my imagination. It had to be. I couldn't have seen what I thought I saw, but that image of her eyes, the way they were fixed on me, stayed with me long after I left the morgue. The next day I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was just tired, that it had been a long shift, and I was seeing things, but then, things started to happen that I couldn't explain. Clara's name kept coming up in conversations. One of the techs mentioned her during our morning briefing, even though we hadn't spoken about her since the night before. Then, that afternoon, I overheard a patient in the waiting room muttering her name over and over. It was quiet, like they were talking in their sleep, but they kept saying, "Clara, Clara, please wake up." That night, I went to check on the morgue records just to put my mind at ease. But when I opened the logbook, something was off. Clara's entry was there, but the time of death was marked as 12:30 a.m., a full hour before we had actually called it. I checked the timestamps on the security footage, but they all matched. The clock in the ER said one thing, but the morgue record said another. The discrepancy made my stomach turn, but I couldn't make sense of it. Then the dreams started. I don't usually remember my dreams, but after that night, Clara's face appeared in my sleep every single night. She was always standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes wide and unblinking, just staring at me. And every time I tried to look away, every time I tried to scream, I couldn't. Her presence was overwhelming, and I woke up every morning drenched in sweat, heart pounding in my chest. One morning I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go back to the morgue and see if Clara's body was still there. Maybe, in some strange way, I could put my mind at ease. But when I got there, the drawer where Clara's body had been was wide open, empty. No one had moved her. No one had signed her out. I asked the morgue staff if they had done anything with her, but they all looked at me like I was crazy. As I left, I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible whisper, coming from somewhere behind me. It was Clara's voice, her voice, but distorted, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside the building. Help me. I haven't been able to shake the feeling that Clara is still out there. Sometimes, when I'm walking down the halls of the ER, I swear I can hear her footsteps following me. I don't know if it's the stress of the job or something more, but I feel like she's still with me, watching me, waiting for me to understand what happened that night. I don't know if Clara was ever really gone. I don't know if she was dead when they brought her in, or if something else happened, but I can't stop thinking about her. I can't shake the feeling that I did something wrong, that I missed something. Maybe some patients don't ever leave. Maybe some souls aren't ready to go. And maybe, just maybe, some things follow you home. The ER is like a living thing. It breathes, it pulses, it moves with the rhythm of life and death. Some nights, it's more alive than others. The chaos is constant, but it's when things quiet down just a little that you start to notice the weird stuff. The things that make your stomach turn and your skin crawl. The things that leave you questioning if the world really is as predictable as we want to believe. I've been a nurse for over 12 years, and I've worked my share of chaotic shifts. You learn to deal with the madness, the frantic patients, the trauma, the blood. You learn to keep your emotions in check, even when it feels like the world is falling apart around you. But no matter how many hours you've spent in the ER, there's always one night, one case, that shakes you to your core. It was a Wednesday night in the middle of summer when it happened. The air was thick and warm, a kind of heat that lingers even after the sun goes down. The air was packed. It always is during the summer, but this night was different. There was a palpable sense of unease in the air, something I couldn't shake. It wasn't anything specific, just a feeling. One of those moments when you can sense something's coming, but you can't put your finger on it. It was around 11:30 p.m. when they brought him in. A man, about 60, unresponsive, his body battered and bruised. He had been found in a parking lot after a hit and run, his clothes torn and soaked in blood. His heart was still beating, but weakly. His vitals were all over the place, a chaotic mess of numbers. His name was Henry Simmons, and by the time the paramedics wheeled him into Trauma Room 3, he was barely clinging to life. The team jumped into action. We intubated him, started pushing fluids, checked for internal bleeding, did everything we could. But it was clear right away he wasn't going to make it. His body was too far gone. His ribs were shattered, his lungs collapsed. There was too much damage. It wasn't a matter of if he was going to die, but when. I don't usually get attached to patients. You can't, not when you see as much trauma as we do. But there was something about Henry that I couldn't shake. Maybe it was the way he looked, his eyes wide open and unseeing, staring into nothingness. Maybe it was the way he seemed to be fighting, even though he was already gone. I don't know, but I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't stop thinking about him. It was about 12:05 a.m. when his heart finally stopped. The flat line on the monitor was the only sound in the room for a few seconds. A deep, heavy silence settled over us. The doctors called it time of death, 12:05. The rest of us, we just stood there, watching as they disconnected him from the machines, his body already starting to cool. I was the one who zipped him up. I've done it 100 times. It's routine. But as I closed the bag, I felt it. That chill that runs down your spine when something isn't right. For just a second, I thought I saw his hand twitch. A subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I blinked, shook my head, and told myself it was just my imagination. I finished the paperwork, handed it off to the techs, and tried to go about my night. But every time I walked past Trauma Room 3, I couldn't shake the feeling that Henry was still there. like he hadn't really left. It wasn't until a few hours later that things started to get strange. The first time I heard the sound, I didn't think much of it. It was late, everyone was tired, the night dragging on. I was in the break room grabbing some coffee, when I heard it. A faint tapping, almost like a knock. It was coming from down the hallway. I didn't think anything of it at first. Maybe it was a patient, maybe a staff member, but when I looked up, the hallway was empty. The tapping continued, echoing through the quiet air. I tried to brush it off. It was just the building settling. But then, it came again, louder this time. A distinct, rhythmic sound, like someone tapping on the walls, walking down the halls. My heart started to race, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. I grabbed my coffee, forced a smile, and went back to my station. But as the night wore on, it got worse. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It seemed to be coming from trauma room 3. I walked past the room a few times, but I never saw anything out of the ordinary. The room was dark, the lights off. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was wrong. It wasn't until the next morning that I found out what had happened. Henry's body had been moved to the morgue, but when the techs went to retrieve it, they found something that made my blood run cold. The body bag was still there, but it was torn open, and Henry's body was gone. Just gone. There were no signs of foul play, no signs of anyone entering or leaving the morgue. The security footage showed nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The morgue staff were as baffled as we were. There was no explanation. I can't tell you how many times I walked past trauma room 3 after that, hoping for some kind of logical answer, but every time I felt it. The tapping, faint at first, then louder, almost like a knock. It followed me down the halls. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. My co-workers started to notice too. Some of them refused to work in trauma room 3. Others started whispering about the ghost of Henry Simmons, how he hadn't truly died, how his soul was restless. I still don't know what happened to Henry Simmons that night. Was he really gone, or had something kept him tethered to the world? The body was gone, but I swear I can still hear him sometimes, walking down the hall, tapping on the walls. Sometimes, when the ER is quiet and the world slows down, I'll hear that rhythm again, slow, steady, like footsteps behind me. I've learned not to question things anymore. In the ER, some things can't be explained. But I've never walked past trauma room 3 the same way again. The ER is a place of extremes, life and death, chaos and calm, hope and despair all wrapped up in one high-pressure environment. But there's one thing I've learned over the years. Things rarely go as expected. Some nights, things happen that make you question everything you thought you knew. And some stories, no matter how hard you try, never leave you. I've been a nurse for over a decade now, and while you get used to the frantic pace and the constant flood of patients, some nights are different. There's always something that lingers, something that you can't explain away. It was a Wednesday night in the fall, right around Halloween. The ER was packed as usual, the steady flow of patients trickling in like clockwork. I was working the overnight shift with a few other nurses and doctors, the usual faces I've come to trust over the years. It was around 2 a.m. when the call came in. Trauma, male, late 30s, head injury, blunt force trauma, no pulse. We prepped trauma room 2, the adrenaline kicking in as we readied the team. The doors swung open, and the paramedics rushed in with a man who looked like he had taken a brutal hit. His face was unrecognizable, swollen, covered in blood. His pupils were fixed and dilated. I could feel the tension in the air as we immediately started working on him. His name was Daniel Brooks. He had been in a car accident, a head-on collision with a truck that ran a red light. His body was already in shock. His blood pressure was dropping fast, and his breathing was shallow. We worked quickly, trying everything we could to stabilize him. I could feel the team's energy, their push against the inevitable, but no matter how much we pushed, no matter how many drugs, compressions, or tubes we used, Daniel didn't respond. His body was too damaged, his heart too weak. The trauma was simply too much. His body had started to give up long before we arrived. Around 3:05 a.m. his heart stopped. We called it time of death. 3:05 a.m. It's always a somber moment when that happens. No matter how many times you've been through it, but you learn to keep moving, keep working. The job doesn't stop. You call the time of death, you mark the chart, and you move on to the next. But there was something about Daniel that night that unsettled me. I was the one who zipped him up. His body was already cold, his face slack, his mouth open in that vacant, lifeless expression. It's something you get used to. That blankness. But as I finished sealing the bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I stepped back, trying to steady my thoughts. But the room felt heavier. The silence after a death is always thick, but this felt different. I moved the body to the morgue, still thinking about how strange everything felt. The night wore on, and I tried to push it to the back of my mind, but it was hard to forget. A few hours later, the ER was quieter. The usual stream of patients had slowed down, and for a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just the stress of the night that had gotten to me. But then the whispering started. At first I thought it was one of the other nurses just talking low, maybe joking to break the silence, but no one was near me. I glanced around, but the hallway was empty. The whispering came again. It was soft, almost like a breath, but distinct enough to make me freeze. "Help me, ... I turned my head, trying to find the source, but there was no one there. The hall was still, the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights above me. But the whispering continued, and this time, it sounded like it was right behind me. "Help me," it repeated. So softly, it was barely a breath. I could feel my heart pounding as I walked toward trauma room 2, where Daniel's body had been. I reached for the door, my hand trembling, and opened it slowly. The room was dark, empty. The machines were off. The bed was still, but there was something wrong about it. The air in the room felt thicker, colder. That's when I saw it. The body bag was unzipped, just slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. I didn't remember unzipping it, didn't remember anyone else being in the room. I walked toward it, my steps slow and cautious. The bag was open, and Daniel's body was gone. Not entirely gone, but half of it had been pulled out, his torso exposed. But there was no sign of anyone having moved him. No footsteps, no disturbance. The lights were still off. The room was silent again, just like it had been when I left. I couldn't breathe. My pulse was racing. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Then, just as I turned to leave, I heard it again, the whisper. Only this time, it wasn't soft. It was louder, more desperate, more real. "Help me, ... double quotes." It came from the body bag. The sound was unmistakable. It was Daniel's voice, or at least it sounded like it. I backed out of the room, my legs shaky beneath me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go back in there, but I had to. I called for one of the other nurses to help, but when we went back to trauma room 2, everything was back to normal. The body bag was zipped up tightly, and Daniel's body was in place. There were no signs of any disturbance, no whispering, no movement. I couldn't explain it. We checked the logs, checked the security footage. Nothing. There was no evidence that Daniel's body had been touched after he had been moved to the morgue, but I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. I tried to shake off what had happened, but the feeling stayed with me. The whispering, the movement, the chill that had settled in the room. I couldn't get rid of the image of Daniel's lifeless eyes staring up at me. After that night, I started to hear the whispering again. Every time I walked down the hall, every time I passed trauma room 2, I'd hear it. "Help me," sometimes faint, sometimes louder. I started avoiding that hallway as much as possible, but it didn't matter. The whisper was always there. It's been months since that night, and I still can't shake the feeling. Sometimes, late at night, when the ER is quiet and the world feels still, I'll hear it. The whisper, a breath, a plea. "Help me, I don't know what happened to Daniel Brooks. I don't know if it was just the stress of the job, or if something else was at play. But I do know this, there is something in the ER that doesn't always leave when the body does. Some souls, they just don't let go. And sometimes, no matter how many deaths you witness, there are some that follow you." I'd love to hear your thoughts. Every comment adds a new shadow to our haunted corner of the internet. Share this if you know someone who enjoys a good scare. More spine-chilling stories are coming soon, and remember, the scariest stories are the ones that could happen to you. Thanks for watching if you dare.